Great, thank you everyone. We'll get started with our next panel. So our next group of distinguished panelists are educators and community leaders, the boots on the ground, so to speak. In the interest of time, I'll jump right in, and I'll start with Principal Erin Rathke of Justice Page Middle School, who actually started as the principal of Ramsey Middle School. How did the journey begin?
So I was sharing this is how I wanted to start because I wanted to really be able to align with what Justice Page said about, for him, this is about justice. And, you know, I have been so honored to be able to go through a name change with Student Voice leading that work. And we could have named our school all kinds of things. And it could have been Allen Page Middle School. It could have been Vikings Page Middle School. It could have been all kinds of things. But what came forward was Justice Page Middle School. And so our students are calling us forward to be having these conversations, and they want justice to be done as well. And so I know the 850 students that I work with every single day are telling me and saying to me that represents them. And so I wanted to start out today to be able to say that it is about justice, and that is the conversation, and our students are asking us to have it as well. I feel so honored to be here. As I'm looking around the room, I see so many people that I've worked with, I've been in partnership with, that are amazing educators. I certainly don't have all the answers. I certainly can bring my own testimony and what it's like to be in a school every single day with brilliant teachers, amazing students, and have a district that supports us in that work. And so I'm really proud to be here and really proud to be in partnership with Justice Page and to have a school and that be our namesake.
Thank you, Erin, for that. So you did begin as a teacher, and you were also a school improvement specialist with Minneapolis Public Schools. You said you don't have all the answers, but as a specialist and in developing strategies, what did you identify as being most effective in improving outcomes of students?
So it's really hard to pick just a few, and certainly it's a lengthy conversation, but I know for us at Justice Page Middle School, some of the things that we're working on are family engagement. Our families have a voice in this story, and how they show up and how they feel when they come into our schools is really important. You know, sometimes schools it's looked at separately, but it really is a business. You know, when you come into the building, how do you feel? All of us know what it's like to go shopping at the place that you want to go shopping at. That's amazing. It's usually because they have great customer service. Well, that's something as a school we have to be thinking about and talking about. So how do our families feel when they come into our building? And they're the ones that have to tell us what that should look like and sound like. So engaging our families. I loved someone from the audience asked things about climate, social emotional learning. It was more than just test scores. And so creating a sense of belonging and our students telling us what that looks like. So student voice and a sense of belonging. I am very passionate about social emotional learning. It's one of the priorities of Minneapolis Public Schools. Justice Page Middle School focuses on that, ensuring that our students are getting skills and believing that it's a skill set that our students can gain in those social emotional competencies and focusing on that. So those multiple measures of what success looks like and what quality looks like for students. Supporting teachers. I often am reading the paper or, you know, listening to this article, and there's a lot about teacher shortage. And if we're not taking really good care of our teachers and creating an environment and a climate for them, we aren't going to have teachers who are in front of our kids. And so supporting teachers and creating a climate for them where they can be successful and giving them the skill sets that they need to be in front of all of our students. Certainly, we're going to be hearing from people who are preparing teachers, and so onboarding brand new teachers. And you know, we're seeing from the data that we have teachers that are in front of urban students that don't have as much experience, and that is the reality. And so, how do we prepare them to be in front of our kids, even if they come to us without everything that they need? How do we onboard them into our schools to ensure that they are successful in front of students? I certainly believe that the principal and the school leaders are a pinnacle part of making sure that a climate and culture in a successful school is happening. So investing in our school leaders. And I we talk a lot about teachers, and there's been lots of conversation about that, but my school could never be run without my secretary or my engineer or the special ed assistant. And so, yes, teachers are the staff members we focus on and we're talking about in here, but there are a lot more people that it takes to run a school and ensuring that they get everything that they need. They are professionals in front of students on the front lines, much more than I am. And so how do I create a climate and culture that ensures that they're successful and that they have skill sets and they have a living wage and that they're able and wanting to be in front of our kids and with us in partnership with our kids?
Dr. Jenkins, just to follow up on that, you were a teacher as well when you started your career, and then you've been a leader in many states, including Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, Atlanta. So when you joined as the superintendent of the Robbinsdale Public Schools, were you surprised by some of the disparities that are there in the state? And do you also face problems such as teacher shortage, as Erin just mentioned?
Well, first of all, prior to coming to Minnesota, I had already done an environmental scan, not only just of Minnesota about how our children are performing, but across the nation. I'm in many conversations with individuals across the country. And then when I got here, I wasn't surprised about the disparities, particularly for children of color, because I have been out in this argument on a national level about children of color and their performance. What really surprised me, the lack of performance of white children. We talk here about these disparity gaps. We're comparing children of color to white children as if though white children are being very successful. When you look at their rate of excellence versus non-excellence, you have a number of white children not doing really well. And along with them, you also have the poor children. I aspired to come to Minnesota back in 1993 when I came here as a young administrator and just visiting someone. And I said I wanted to finish my career here. And at that time, Minnesota was thriving on many levels. And so throughout my career, I always kept an eye on Minnesota, what's going on in Minnesota. But I have to tell you, what is daunting is to see here in Minnesota to have disparities worse than my home state of Alabama. Mm-hmm. And so I'm in a lot of national conversations about and international conversations about early childhood. And now that I talk about I'm from Minnesota, okay, it is embarrassing because I consider us to be one of the greatest states in terms of wealth, ideas, and innovations. And if we have this type of wealth, ideas, and innovation, why can't we get it right for children of color and those children who are not performing at a level of excellence right now? So I do agree here with my colleague in terms of some of the investments, what need to happen in terms of how we need to invest more in the quality, not just of instruction. We talk about the children, and I was very excited when I got this call when I asked the question and the response. I wasn't just excited about the call. I'm not starstruck. The Vikings, my mother loved the Vikings. I was okay with the Vikings, okay? But when I had an opportunity to talk to President Kashkari and Justice Page, and I said, I'm gonna be honest with you. I don't do courageous conversation. They make me puke. 30 years into this game, I know the tough work it takes to really move the needle. Are you gonna be about really trying to move the needle? And both said, yes. And so when I looked at the amendment and what drew me, when it said all, the same thing that drew me to Robbinsdale schools, it says all. And when you put out all, that's controversial within itself because truly we're fundamentally flawed in this state and throughout the country, which initially only represents our federal constitution. And then when you look at the state level, there are some inadequacies within the Constitution that allow these disparities to continue to persist. But if we invest in early childhood, we invest in teachers, treat teachers like professionals, give them the appropriate time to prepare, just like we would an engineer in a company, then we would be better off with our teachers if we give them not only professional development time, but more pay. And we begin to change the barriers within the language of some of our current current policies and practices just the policies, then we could do more in education to serve all children for real.
Thanks for that. So just to kind of elaborate, in your experience, what are the things that have worked in your school district?
I think right now we've been on a path. Coming into Robbinsdale, I'm looking at how we're looking as a team, what's the issue with reading? And if you look at the state of Minnesota, there's an issue with reading again. Go back and look at your district. Anybody in here right now, raise your hand if you had 99% reading. You had 100% reading. Okay, I just took out everybody. So there's a reading in the state, seriously, when we started talking about fourth grade reading here, third grade reading. So we've been investigating, and we've recently, in collaborations with our teachers, with our community, we came up with, we need to really focus on reading. One of the number one determinant of how a student's going to persist throughout their schooling, and then have the position to be able to transfer from one point, pivot from one point, I'm passionate about this today, tomorrow I want to go here. As a part of our unified district vision, we say that we believe that children really should have an opportunity to pursue the career that they want, or participate in articulated skilled trades, or go to college. We don't try to box them. And so to do that, we know that we must fundamentally get reading moving in the right direction. So our board and our community made a heavy investment in the letters program, and I share that with everyone. And if you look at it, you research it, you'll see it's a pretty solid thing. But it's not just letters, but it's the commitment we're making to the professional development that needs to happen. We also looked at an elementary curriculum in our state. What we were looking at in terms of the state standards, and there's not a clear articulated curriculum for a lot of districts, not just Robbinsdale, but in the elementary, we say we have to focus on the elementary, so we just adopted that curriculum to benchmark for our elementary. We'll continue to look at the spectrum from prenatal with our early childhood program. We were one of the first early childhood programs in the state in Robbinsdale. So when we look at the whole piece, and this is just the beginning part of it, but what we're trying to do is to see all of our students, serve all of our students, support all of our students, which when we had, when I worked with my colleagues and we went out and had some community conversations with our communities, it came across clearly that what we have, that we're doing in practice, people really didn't feel as if though we were seeing everyone, serving everyone, supporting everyone. So we adopted that back in our district. And on top of that, our board, after working through that process, they adopted an equity policy. So in our district right now, not only are we trying to increase as a district and have high performance, but we know we're highly diverse and we're addressing that and we're in pursuit of excellence. But every day we look through the lens of equity. So it's a lot of great things going on with our staff in our district. And I think the community support, as was shown by the passage of the referendum during a very tough economic time, there's a lot of positive going on in our district right now.
Well, that's great. So Sondra, I'll turn to you. So Dr. Jenkins talked about the early childhood programs. Erin talked about family as being one of the key ingredients in development of children. And you work on both these issues as the executive director of Northside Achievement Zone. And you work both with family, communities, as well as schools. Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about how do you, in your model of bringing the community and schools together, what has been successful in this field, and especially improving outcomes for economically disadvantaged students?
Absolutely. Oh, am I? If you don't mind, I want to go a little bit rogue on you, just a little bit. I want to first thank President Kashkari and Justice Page for bringing this forward. You are doing something that we all have wanted done, like something dramatic, and so I just want to thank you for your courage in doing this and just the thought, right? So thank you. And I just, I gotta say, if you could imagine that that white students were 50th out of 50 states in graduating on time for high school. So just imagine that. If here in the state of Minnesota, white students were 50th out of 50 in 50 states in graduating on time from high school, or if 79% of white students were not at grade level in reading, or 82% of white students were not at grade level in reading, this would be done. Drop the mic. These are the stats for black students. Right. And to think that we don't need an educational status quo abolitionist movement is cray-cray, because it is exactly what we need, and we would have done it decades ago if the same outcomes for white students were happening to black. And so for me, in terms of what's working, and this is why I'm so excited about this legislation, is that about 10 years ago in 2011, President Obama's administration granted the Northside of Minneapolis a Promised Neighborhood grant of $28 million for 5 years. All right, and it was with the premise that we would make a promise to our students that schools can't do it alone, and that we would work in a community fashion across family support, housing, jobs, health, and then the education pipeline, early childhood, after school, summer, plus with the schools. And we work with public district, public charter, and parochial. One of our Catholic school partners is here, and of course the district, and that we would do all of this, and that together and with parents and community partners would change the educational and life outcomes of students. And what I will tell you is that as I pull back today, and we have, and a couple of our board members are here, so board members, you're getting this early, but we have data that we're going to share, and all of the data that we look at across housing, health, and all of that, all scaffolds up to the work that we're doing with our schools, in partnership with our schools. And what I will tell you is, so Promised Neighborhoods is amazing, and the data is showing that the kids who are in our pipeline of support and getting all these layers, because it matters. Just like Representative Moran said, it absolutely matters that a child has a place to live and they're eating and they have parents who, are there and have jobs and, and health is taken care of. All of that matters. But what our data is showing, and again, even though our kids are doing better, is that even with that, our kids are still not performing where any of us would want our kids to perform academically. And so we can do all the housing, we can do all the jobs, we can do all the health, and if the education establishment itself is not doing what it needs to do, the rest of it does not matter. All right, like centrally. And again, the outcomes are great, they're wonderful, and we see parents stepping up. So we have parents who are going through parenting education classes, and when they graduate, their babies graduate, and they get these little T-shirts that say when their baby will graduate from a 4-year college. We have our housing partners that are struggling with, the housing market and what they need to do in order to place them, and we're struggling in those areas. Our jobs partners are struggling, and they're all in systems, and they're doing their part. And the part of the establishment of all of this that I've been seeing, that I can now 10 years later say, is that the educational establishment has not done its part. All right, and we have to have that happen if we're ever going to change this. And so I'll fight all day long for the wraparound supports. It is absolutely necessary. I'll be at the Capitol, legislators, again, you know that, for funding. And at the end of the day, I'm going to be, and I know our community is going to stand with whomever will stand with this kind of legislation, this kind of change to the Constitution. By the way, everybody who knows me knows that I carry my Constitution, right? And this Constitution, created in 1787, we as a country knew that it needed to get amended, that democracy is a movement, and that you make it better with every generation. And so you have a Bill of Rights, and you have amendments to address equity, to address justice that this didn't address. So even this has changed. But our state constitution since 1857 knows that equity, a lack of equity, is our #1 problem, and we have been recalcitrant to change it is unconscionable to me. And so the wraparounds work. Partnering with the schools, district, parochial. Again, the data is showing that it's making a difference, and it is not fast enough. And this kind of constitutional change, I think, it's not a panacea, but I only get to sit here as an African-American woman leading a nonprofit as president and CEO because of a constitutional change that was made, and because my parents and my ancestors got to fight for my opportunity to be up here by correcting laws that weren't meant for me.
Thank you for that. So Sondra's kids and students in NAS are not college age yet. But as the principal of Minnesota State Community and Technical College, President Brimhall, do you see the disparities in college readiness when students enroll and enter your university? How big a problem is this for you, and what is your university doing about it?
Yes, well, of course we do, because children of Minnesota grow up to be freshmen in college in Minnesota. And I do want to say that Minnesota State Community and Technical College is in greater Minnesota. So we have campuses in Detroit Lakes, Fergus Falls, Moorhead, and Wadena. And we serve about 8,000 credit students annually. And because the unemployment rate in the largest community we serve, the Fargo-Moorhead West Fargo community, is about 1.6%, we serve about 7,000 students who are already working in business and industry as we continue to enhance their training. And I set that context because sometimes people think that we are Minnesota State colleges and universities, and we are a part of the 37 colleges and universities that make up one of the largest systems in our entire state. So the same disparities exist in higher education, which is why our chancellor and our entire system has made a commitment to equity in 2030 for every single student enrolled, all students enrolled in higher education in our 37 colleges and universities. And we know the work is going to be tough. The conversations are already very tough. But I promise you, it's not more difficult than navigating the systemic and systematic barriers that our students face every single day. We can't forget that piece of this puzzle. It's going to be tough to get to Equity 2030. It's going to be tough to have this conversation, but it's not more difficult than what our students are trying to do. One of the things that's interesting about higher education, and certainly in Minnesota, is that we have a great PSEO program where students are allowed to take credits in high school for free. It's important for you to know when I give you the next group of statistics that M-State has 48 high schools where we offer high school classes to 2,000 students. It really just perpetuating the gap of those that are college ready and those that are not. So those that are college ready in high school are getting access to free classes and earning credits and reducing their college debt in ways that students who are not college ready are not. So knowing that we serve over 2,000 students in our region with those courses, it might be interesting or surprising for you to hear that in the fall of 2019, only 25% of all incoming students at our college, out of 8,000, were considered college ready. So assuming that all of those students need to take developmental coursework, which isn't true, but let's assume that, it means just at M-State, that's $1.266 million in tuition that students are using grant aid for or paying for that do not count toward their credential or higher education. Even more troubling is that it disproportionately affects students of color, with only 7% of the students. We're about 40% students of color at M-State. Only 7% of those were considered college ready when they entered for the first time this fall. It doesn't mean we're not doing the work. We've done a tremendous amount of work, especially in developmental education. Our faculty are incredible. They're reducing textbook costs, annually saving our students over $30,000 a year in developmental ed in mathematics, and we're reducing the number of credits in math and trying to teach it in all different ways to reduce costs for students. So the work we're doing is having an impact, but when you start with only 25% coming in college ready, it's challenging.
So, Dr. Jenkins, you mentioned curriculum for elementary school, but it seems to me one of the things that could possibly be sort of first stepping stone is it change of curriculum that's needed? What is it really that's needed to get our students college and career ready?
No answer in education is just a one silver bullet. So you need curriculum and you need quality staff, period. And let me just say this too, and even when you say going well, I have to ask, what do you mean when you say going well? Okay, because just because we're moving the needle, it doesn't mean we're going well, and the disparities are real. But I think when you start thinking about education, and you heard the mention there of the Constitution, federal and state, and when we're looking at policies, the policies impact practice, and the practice impact the people. And our adults right now within our state, 75% of the people surveyed by one of the demographers said that they don't believe that students of color can learn at a high level. Okay, so we have to go back to the attitude in terms of the adults. And I'm going to go back to Again, I wanted to be very clear why I said when I looked at this and I said all students, all mean all. I know we have racial disparities, but we have economic disparities, and those things together, well, you have to get everyone. You have to have the school system, you have to have the lawmakers, you have to have the business community. So I was excited to come and have some dialogue about what we should do. Whether it's a change to the amendment or not, I think we have to illuminate these disparities. We've been having quiet conversation about the crisis that we currently have in the state of Minnesota. But this is real. And I heard the business person say earlier about it's not just about the business, it's the business because it's about our quality of life. And right now, I think the things that we have to do in the school system, for myself as an educational leader, we have to change the conversation from test scores and isolation to outcomes. What are going to be the life outcomes for this particular kid? My grandson was just born November the 20th, Bronze. I want Bronze to come here and have all the opportunities that all children have. And that's no different when you go back to Brown versus the Board of Education. The same thing the parents said. I want my little black boy to have the same opportunities, access as all those white children have. And it shouldn't just be just black and white. It should be about all children having the access.
Absolutely. And the amendment, the proposed amendment, does focus on accountability on outcomes. So that's definitely something that's part of the conversation.
One thing I have to add there, though, but when we're focusing on outcomes for children, because I believe we have to do that, we have to also focus on outcome for the adults who are teaching the children. Anxieties, social-emotional, mental health issues are real, and we don't talk about that. We just assume that a teacher can go every day, an administrator can go every day, and they have no issues. But if we're going to deal with education, we have to be all-encompassing and deal with the whole child. We have to deal with the whole community, and we have to begin to address these issues. If not, they make it back to my grandson who's going to be in early childhood from that same teacher that we're saying, well, no, it's not the teacher, it's just kid. No, the kid with a good teacher, with a good administrator, with a great engineer in the building, great assistant in the building, all of that must be considered as we begin this new thinking. Since we're going to have new thinking, let's have new thinking all the way around and not just use test scores as a measure for what's a successful school.
Can I? Yeah. And
Sure.
I want to just offer something that you said that I appreciate is that what's well, but one of the things that I'm thinking about when kids are coming to my building in 6th grade, I have a time crunch. I have 3 years with them and that is it. And so I don't have time to kind of mess around and like we're trying to figure out what's the right thing to do and what's not the right thing to do. Did this work? Did this? We don't have time. We have 3 years. That's it. And when I say goodbye to those babies and it's time for them to go to high school, I better make sure that they're ready to go because the minute they hit their freshman year, the first quarter, the first grade, the first F, the first suspension, the first too many attendance is impacting them in their graduation rate. And those are all things that show that they might not graduate later. So I better make sure they're ready when they step foot in that high school because that freshman year matters to them. And so we're talking about that all the time, but I'm on a time crunch. So that well has to happen fast because I don't have a lot of time. And every day and every moment and every opportunity that I'm in front of a student or our teachers are in front of students, there's no time to waste.
Yeah, and I, as we talk about how to get this legislation passed, teachers cannot be made the enemy. Right, they cannot, and that is, where would we be without our teachers? I don't know. Now, every teacher who's teaching shouldn't be teaching, right? But one of the things, and I'm hoping, so there's just so many things that could hang off of this constitutional change. So if we're talking about quality education for all children, then it matters what's happening in terms of the adults that are teaching them, right? To make sure we have quality adults, right? Teachers of color, that teachers, that there's merit pay, that there's teachers who understand racialized trauma and their own trauma. So something that we're doing within the Northside Achievement Zone is wellness work, and we're working in partnership with Washburn Children's Center, with Dr. Ann Garrity from the university, with Resma Minikim, who's written a lot about this subject, and we're actually working with teachers and the trauma that they bring to the classroom. And we shouldn't forget that 94% of our teachers are white. and 75% are women. Right? And so, but in my context, and when you start talking about kids of color and low-income kids, it's the exact opposite in terms of who's showing up in the classroom. And in our community, it's all black and brown. And so they're bringing, it's not just the kids who bring trauma to the classroom, and there are ways that a system of low expectations and also what they are going through and dealing with, they too have to be supported. And so I am hoping that this is the doorway that allows us to show our teachers, the ones who are committed to education, and I think many of them are, and who love our kids and who know how to teach reading and, who are excellent in different areas, that they can get the support that they need. So we have to provide that as well.
Before I go further, just to remind you to post your questions at pigeonhole.at. President Brimhall, Sondra just mentioned that it's important that when teachers walk in, who's walking in the classroom is important. So as teaching programs in your university to educate future educators, are there any programs that are there any aspects of attracting more teachers of color, especially teachers who are male of color, in your programs to be future educators?
I certainly know there are within our system. Because we're a community and technical college, the students with us would be on the transfer path, so they'd be coming to us for their first 2 years and then transferring on. In education, I've said in the last couple of years, we were so busy worrying about everybody else's workforce that we forgot to worry about our own. So we've had, we just have concerns about career and technical educators and people going into the field and wanting to be teachers. I mean, that's our general concern, is the number of applicants we used to get for a position and the number we get now are drastically different. Those are, and we have had in the past healthcare programs with students enrolled in them. The industry, we're a response to industry need, and we had to tell the students, unfortunately, we couldn't start the program because we couldn't find anyone to teach them. So we get in that counter offer piece for educators. And I was a first generation college student, and at the institution where I'm now the president, and things were so different when I went to school, and even though I was a first-generation student from a low-income family, we've been talking about boots and grit and all those things that we've really thrown out of our vocabulary, because even though I was a first-generation college student and I was from a low-income family, I had boots on that I could pull up. We've stopped using those analogies because many of our students don't have the boots in the first place. And so, like my colleagues up here and everyone in the room, it's really, really working with students. We have the food pantries, we have emergency grants, we have emergency housing, we have everything that they need to be successful, yet still we have these gaps in place. And so I think, restarting the conversation, having all of you here is the biggest benefit to something this bold, is really getting to a place where we stop talking about the things that we've been talking about for a very long time, and we try something.
One of the things, if I could follow up on that as well, we're talking about legislation right now, Constitution. It's been there 163 years, right? We've had Brown versus the Board of Education since then, right? We've become more diverse since I came here in 1993. We've had the Green Six, 1968, that talks about gold standard for how you go about integrating our schools. And I would also like to suggest to everyone, if you have not yet, and I have to tell Attorney Sherman recommended a book, The Children of the Dream, to me. I ask you to go out and read this book and read it again, because a lot of what we're going through right now, we're back in the 50s and 60s. And this whole notion that you can't get people of color to come to Minnesota is false. I've been in the Midwest for 31 years, and I'm from Alabama. But what we have to do, addressing getting teachers of color in the program, we have to be intentional. And we have to shut down the microaggression that occurs and the macroaggression that occurs. This starts with when you propose various forms of amendments, right? Address that too. It's all encompassing. And this proposed amendment to me could be a catalyst for a conversation. Whether something changes or not, I think it gives us an opportunity to really assess what we have in place. Are we satisfied with the current outcomes? That's the bottom line to it.
And by the way, getting more teachers of color in the classroom is paramount, and all the data talks about, the importance of especially young black boys actually seeing a male teacher, a teacher of color in front of them makes a difference in terms of their outcomes, in terms of graduating from college and high school. And so, again, this legislation, this constitutional change, if the state then is responsible for ensuring a quality education, and teachers of color are part of that, then we have to start looking at what blocks that from happening. And then change the policy around that. So right now, if 94% of our teachers are white, then that means all the new teachers, if we become aggressive about the teachers reflecting the students that they're educating, then all the ones that are hired last will be teachers of color. And so Minneapolis, St. Paul, many districts can have all of these grow your own programs, but then as soon as there is a budget crunch and teachers have to be let go, they are the first to go. And so, again, not a panacea, but a great remedy around the things that many of us who have been committed to education transformation have been just hitting our head against a wall around.
In Robbinsdale, we have a memorandum of agreement to address just what you just talked about. And this was the union working with the administration. And I just want to say, too, as a public school educator, we have to all work together. We have to stop the us and them in education, administrators versus teachers. And as a society right now, we have to stop this mess of Republican versus Democrat versus independent. Let everybody who want to have that fight go on an island all by themselves. And then let us focus on human decency for all people, all children, all adults.
Well, on that note, let me open up for audience questions. So the first question is for you, Erin. How will a constitutional amendment, if passed, help improve student learning outcomes in your school?
So one of the things that I heard Justice Page and President Kashkari talk about is that the paramount duty of the state to fund our schools. And I think one of the things that I'm thinking about when we're talking about these disparities is when I think about our special education students, when I think of our students who English is their second language, they need resources and things around being educated, and our teachers need resources to be able to educate our students at a higher level who are coming in and needing more. And so I think about that being something that will be really important. So when I think about outcomes for our school, I want to ensure that our students of color, our special education students, and our ELL students are getting everything they need to be successful, because their gap is much bigger. And so I can't have a year's worth of growth in them. I need to have 3 years worth of growth in them in a very short period of time. And so ensuring that there's enough resources for our teachers and for those students will be really important, and that would make a really significant difference in the outcomes that I know that my school is producing. Because those are places that we still struggle with. And having enough teachers and enough support staff to be able to be around our students. And so this conversation and all of the people that are in here, and I heard someone say a coalition of all of us coming together, we're having a real dialogue and a real conversation. And so then we have to ask for all of those things that we're saying are impeding us from being able to be successful. So I heard so many things that were said here today that have to happen to ensure. And if those things do happen, I do think that we can have outcomes that are much more powerful. And it can't be slow, and it can't be small growth. It has to be big gains in small periods of time.
So the next question is, within your sectors of work, where do you anticipate the maximum opposition to this amendment?
I think within yourself. You're going to wrestle with, do you need to go with the traditional norms and be accepted in the community? It goes back to W.B. Du Bois' 1903, the double consciousness. And see, it's not just for African Americans. It's for you as white folks as well. It's for Latino X people. See, and we have to go back and look at our own consciousness and see what happened to the American Indian people. Are we okay with that? Are we going to continue to tell the story that Christopher Columbus discovered America? See, The wrestle is always with yourself. Ron Edmonds said a long time ago, everything we know, we need to know to do what's good for poor children. And when you do what's right for poor children, you do what's right for all children. So the wrestle would be within ourselves. Do we have the courage to do what's right for human decency? Not for my neighborhood, not for your neighborhood, but for our country and for our larger society. So that's the real wrestle. That's the real opposition. Will I go back and fundamentally change my thought process for how I need to advocate to get it done? Passing an amendment, a change to the Constitution is just that. We've had a Constitution, and it was imperfect. Didn't even recognize me as a human being. On my birth certificate, it still says Negro, and I reject it. Okay, so the fight would be in myself. Will you in this audience, will those people out there watching be willing to wrestle with yourself and say, enough of this. I'm going to do the right thing today when I wake up.
So the next question. So as mentioned by Justice Page and President Kashkari, that the amendment itself doesn't have a remedy. If you were, as educators and community leaders, if you were brought on board to recommend some remedies, could you just, what would it be?
Yeah, sure. So would love merit pay for teachers who are willing to work in my neighborhood and neighborhoods like ours across the, across the state. Every other organization or industry actually pays people more based on performance. And I don't know, I think this is one of the holdouts of the educational establishment that doesn't allow it to happen. Longer school days and longer school years, we're no longer based on an agrarian calendar. And don't know why only our public charter and our private schools are willing to do that. Having more of that would be absolutely amazing. Having more trauma responsive training, again, for teachers and care for teachers. I can't stress that enough. This is not player hating on teachers who happen to be part of the union, but we have to care for them as well. And then reading, like we said, again, and teachers being able to teach reading and the curriculums and making those stronger. And then also, of course, the wraparound supports. And while the school district can't control all of that, I think that this change to the Constitution that will be done on the state level then starts to open the gateway for changes in housing, changes in income and jobs and workplace and so on. So it just feels like it's a real gateway. And not a drug, but a gateway.
President Brimhall, would you like to add something to that?
When I look at I was just looking at the equity report for college funding and finance, and low-income students should be able to go get a credential at a community and technical college or university or the higher education institution of their choice without shouldering a debt burden or having to work so many hours that they jeopardize their chance of even graduating in the first place. And according to the Education Trust, the most recent numbers just recently released, the affordability gap at Minnesota public community and technical colleges, so our lowest cost institution in the state, is still $5,118 a year. And that's with student aid and the student working 10 hours a week. They're still $5,000 short a year and going in debt. It's the fifth highest in the nation. So right now, I don't know that funding fixes everything, but I do know that we are trying to provide support in ways that we've never provided support, in that one-on-one, every day, every moment interaction that we know changes lives in education. And that's really difficult to do, not only from a staffing perspective, but with students who know they're $5,000 of debt every year. They're trying to make ends meet. So, we can't provide enough protein bars to get them to achieve their dreams. That just isn't possible. And I think that just taking a look at the way that we fund and the way I believe we have the employees in place that know what needs to happen and we're choosing to be in education in this labor market. We're choosing this work because we believe in people, and we've got to figure out a way to allow them to do their work.
So talking about workforce. In the last panel, we heard business leaders voice their support for improving student outcomes. So how would you or your institution partner with business leaders now, and how could business leaders do more to support student outcomes in collaboration with your institutions?
I think what I saw here today, business leaders willing to step forward and engage in a discussion about what's good for our society outside of just their business interests, because in reality, what's good for schools are going to be good for businesses, because it's good for our communities. If you see a highly educated community, you typically see less criminal justice involvement. And so as a society, we have to think about that. The other thing, I think when we start talking about just the partnerships, the articulations that we should have from prenatal, dealing with our doctors, prenatal care, all the way through to the workforce. And we should have an articulated plan that's laid out. And I think when you're looking at for all, anytime you say all, you just can't pick out a piece of what should be done. It's a multiplicated approach that must be taken to really address all. Passing of a legislation, we've had that done before. It doesn't do anything if you don't change the attitude or the resources that's necessary. Brown versus the Board of Education, everyone look at it like it was just about integration. No, what happened with Brown impacted everything else in our society. This type of legislation, that's the thing that we're wrestling with. Are we willing now to allow people of color, right, to come in the workforce, to be the CEOs, to be the superintendents, to be the whatever, like everyone else? Not just hiring people to come in at the entry-level jobs. We're talking about full participants in our society. So when you say something like this, let's be honest. That's why people are nervous, because they're like, whoa, this is just a little too far. You live in my neighborhood now, you know, and see, and I can choose to live in your neighborhood or not. That's what I want for every child, to get to that part. And by the way, I'm a project kid, come from very small means. 3rd grade education with my father, 10th grade education with my mother, and they produced a PhD. So you can't tell me these parents aren't smarter than my parents, or as smart as my parents.
Thank you for that. So on that note, I just want to thank the panelists for being here today, and thank you, the audience, for excellent questions.